August 12th, 30 BC. Alexandria, a woman sits alone in a palace chamber, dressed in gold and purple. Two attendants stand by her sides, one carrying a basket of figs. In 10 minutes, all three will be dead. But this isn't a story about how Cleopatra died. It is about the 10 days before 10 days in which the man who would become Rome as first emperor dismantled her world without violence, without torture, without execution. He used isolation, manipulation, and one unspoken threat so precise that Cleopatra's entire kingdom, her freedom, and her life were reduced to a single, impossible choice. The weapon that finally destroyed her wasn't an army. It wasn't a sword. It was her son. And the most disturbing part, it wasn't he. What happened in that chamber, it was how methodically Octavian made sure she had no other option. August 1st, 30 BC, 10 days earlier. Alexandria's harbor was burning. Cleopatra and Mark Antony had gathered the largest naval force the Mediterranean had ever seen. Over 500 warships, legions from a dozen kingdoms, all committed to a single decisive battle. They lost at Actium, off the coast of Greece. The defeat was catastrophic, but not gradual. Ships collided, caught fire. Commanders abandoned formation. Antony pursued Cleopatra's retreat while his fleet was annihilated behind him. Their alliance crumbled overnight. Loyal kings withdrew armies. Roman senators who had supported Antony switched allegiance to Octavian. Gold meant for soldiers vanished into private vaults. By the time Antony and Cleopatra returned to Egypt, their army existed only on paper. Now, a year later, Octavian's legions stood outside Alexandria. Inside the city, betrayal spread faster than fear. Antony's cavalry defected first, riding straight into Octavian's camp, no fighting. 10 infantry, then the remaining ships, which surrendered without a battle. The palace, once the seat of kings and philosophers, became a cage of whispered panic. Officials fled, servants vanished, guards abandoned posts. Antony wandered empty halls, shouting orders to soldiers who were no longer there. Cleopatra made a different choice. She retreated into her mausoleum, a massive stone structure she had built years earlier. Tomb and fortress in one. It had a single entrance, 3-foot-thick walls, and no windows. Inside, she gathered her most treasured possessions: gold, jewels, incense, ebony. Centuries of dynastic wealth and sealed the doors. Her plan, if it was a plan, remains unclear. Ancient sources suggest she intended to burn everything, denying Octavian both wealth and spectacle. Others claim she hoped to negotiate from a position of strength, using her treasure as leverage. Then she sent a messenger to Antony with a single, shocking message. She was dead. The effect was immediate. Antony, already unraveling, accepted it without question. He ordered his slave to kill him. The slave refused and killed himself instead. Antony, with fatal resolve, drove his sword into his stomach but did not die instantly. Bleeding on the chamber floor, the truth arrived. Cleopatra was alive. What followed, recorded in meticulous detail by Plutarch, reads almost like a surgical operation. Antony's body was brought to the murder. Cleopatra refused to open the door, not from cruelty, but opening it would mean losing her only fortification. Instead, ropes were lowered from a window. Cleopatra and her attendants pulled Antony's dying body up the wall. He died in her arms inside the tomb. By the time his body stopped moving, Cleopatra was alone. No army, no allies, no kingdom, and Octavian was already inside Alexandria, plotting her capture. What Octavian did next was psychological warfare at its most precise. He did not want Cleopatra dead. Dead queens don't parade. Obera decade. He had fought civil wars against Romans, against Antony, against the Senate, against anyone challenging his rise. Publicly, a living Cleopatra in chains would validate Rome's victory over a foreign threat, not Roman citizens. She would become a symbol of seduction, corruption, and conquest. But Octavian understood the risks. Cleopatra had spent 20 years navigating Roman politics. She had allied with Julius Caesar, borne his child, survived Caesar's assassination, rebuilt power with Antony. She spoke 9 languages, commanded fleets, negotiated with kings. If allowed any opportunity, she could destroy herself and everything she controlled, denying Octavian both wealth and spectacle. So he acted with precision. He didn't storm the marine. He sent Gaius Proculus, a lieutenant Antony had trusted, to speak with Cleopatra. Proculus offered vague assurances of negotiation and safety. While she was distracted, soldiers scaled the walls, entered through an upper window, and moved silently. Ancient sources differ. Plutarch claims she grabbed a dagger. Cassius Dio suggests poison, but she was subdued before she could act. No violence, no chains. Simply transferred from tomb to palace, from queen to prisoner. Her rooms remained luxurious. She kept her servants. Meals were untouched, belongings intact. But every door watched, every servant searched, every item examined. One guard had one order: she must not die. This was not mercy, not cruelty. Logistics. Octavian needed her alive, intact, and compliant for his triumph in Rome. 3 days later, he visited her personally. No guards, measured words, polite conversation. No threats, no promises. Ancient sources describe it as courteous, almost clinical. Octavian listened as she spoke of Caesar, her children, the value of Egypt as a stable province. He responded vaguely. Cooperation might influence the treatment of her children, but committed to nothing. Cleopatra, a master negotiator, tried to find leverage. She presented inventories, offered smooth transition plans, emphasized her children's ability to maintain stability. Octavian cataloged every detail. Her answers, her knowledge, every ally she mentioned, was seized by Rome. Every scrap of information became a tool to dismantle her remaining kingdom. Isolation deepened. No visitors, no messages, no news. Cleopatra existed in a bubble where the only voice was Octavian's, and only what served him. Then Cleopatra made her move. She stopped eating. Meals went untouched. She grew weak, fevered. It wasn't a modern hunger strike, it was simpler. Death by illness, refusal, or neglect would deny Octavian his triumph as surely as poison. Guards reported it immediately. Octavian's response was swift, measured. He did not threaten or punish. He reminded her of the consequences to her children. That was enough. She resumed eating. The trap was complete. Death meant her children died. Compliance meant humiliation in Rome. Silence meant waiting, uncertainty, and powerlessness. The critical piece was her son, Caesarion, 17, her son with Julius Caesar. The rest twins, Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene, younger Ptolemy Philadelphus, were politically manageable, but Caesarion, Caesar's biological son, posed a generational threat to Octavian's legitimacy. Cleopatra had sent him east toward India to secure his survival. The treasure negotiations, the palace cooperation, all was theater buying time while her son disappeared into safety. Then the trap closed. Her son returned, deceived by his tutor, believing Octavian's promises. He entered Alexandria too late. Cleopatra realized the unthinkable. Negotiation could no longer save him. She focused only on what she could control. Her own final act. August 12th, 30 BC, Cleopatra bathed, dressed in gold and purple, and visited Antony's tomb. She performed the proper rituals, poured libations, and spoke practically, not romantically, promising she would join him soon. She returned to the palace, ordered figs, bread, wine, wrote a sealed letter to Octavian requesting burial beside Antony, and dismissed all servants except her two attendants, Iris and Charmian. By afternoon, guards became suspicious. The letter reached Octavian. He understood immediately. Guards rushed to her chambers. They found 3 bodies. Cleopatra on a golden couch, Iris beside her, Charmian adjusting the crown in her final moments. One guard demanded, "Was this well done?" Charmian replied, "It was well done," words recorded by multiple ancient sources. The method remains uncertain. Aspervenom, a hidden vial, or poison, but Cleopatra, 39 years old, died on her own terms, in royal regalia, surrounded by loyal servants. Octavian had conquered everything but. She denied him what he most desired. A living, broken queen. Furious, he honored her request. Cleopatra was buried with Antony in full ceremonial rites. Caesarion, her son, was executed soon after. Her other 3 children were sent to Rome, raised by Octavian's sister, and eventually married into Roman families. Egypt became a Roman province, Octavian's personal territory, and within 3 years, he became Augustus, Rome's first emperor. He won everything except Cleopatra herself. Her death wasn't weakness or romance. It was the last available move in a game where every other option had been systematically removed. When Octavian stripped away her kingdom, her allies, her freedom, and her son, he left her one remaining form of control. The ending of her story, she chose gold, regalia, and dignity over chains and humiliation. Octavian conquered Egypt, but and the most disturbing part of Cleopatra's final 10 days ISNT. What she did in that chamber. It's how methodically Octavian ensured she had no other choice.